Clear prop.
Star 73, Yankee number 2, following twin traffic, 3 mile final, clear subject. 1 Charlie Bravo, exit in runway 25, going 4 mile final.
This is Behind the Prop with United Flight Systems owner and licensed pilot Bobby Doss and his co-host, Major Airline Captain and designated pilot examiner Wally Mulhern. Now let's go Behind the Prop.
What's up, Wally?
Hey, Bobby, how are you?
I'm great. This is another show that came through a listener. We've gotten to give away a whole lot of mugs and ship a number of mugs around the country for these great show ideas. Someone sent us an email. I think he sent it to me, but you can send us both an email if you want to. Bobby@behindtheprop.com, or include Wally and include Wally. Wally@behindtheprop.com. We'd love to hear your feedback, your thoughts, and maybe how you're sharing or using the podcast in your aviation goals and careers. But this episode is all from a customer, not even a customer, I guess he's a listener, who asked us to talk about fly following and cross-country tips, tricks, best practices. So we've put together a short list of that. Wally and I both spend a lot of time at this airport. It's David Wayne Hooks in the Houston area, and it's Class Delta airspace, has an FAA tower, pretty busy, could have 3 active runways for a little municipal airport. Like, lots could be going on. A water runway that is it's used fairly regularly, a small runway about 3,600 feet, and then a big runway that's about 7,300 feet with a lot of jet traffic. So, and a culmination of 4 flight schools with quite a few freelancers is what I would think's out there right now. So yeah. Lots of busy airports. Most of our students probably fly following. If you've not been around aviation a long time, you might not even know what a fly following is, but it's a great tool. And based on this listener's request, we're going to talk about fly following. Wally, what are your thoughts when we first start talking about fly following?
Well, every 2 weeks, I get my paycheck, and there's a section where some money goes away, and it's called federal tax. So where's that money going? What am I getting for that money, my tax money? Well, one thing is we have the best air traffic control system in the world, I believe, right here in the good old US of A. And we have the ability to use that system. If you're going to fly a cross-country flight from wherever to wherever, you have the ability to ask air traffic control for flight following. And even if you're a VFR pilot, you are a student pilot, and maybe a private pilot that is non-instrument rated, and it's going to feel like you are on an IFR flight plan. All you need to do is call up the controlling agency. At some places, you can do it right from the ground. You can say, Hooks Ground, I'm flying VFR from here to Little Rock, Arkansas. We would like VFR flight following, and they're probably going to give you an altitude, or they're going to ask you an altitude, and you tell them what altitude you're going at. And they will probably come back and assign you a squawk code and assign you a departure control frequency. And as soon as you leave the Delta airspace, they'll hand you off to departure control or approach control, and you'll call them up, and they'll basically watch you the whole way. And time permitting, they'll point out traffic to you. It's just a great tool. You are on somebody's radar. Literally on somebody's radar screen. They're watching you the whole way. If you were to have a problem, all it is a key of the microphone to call them up and say, hey, we've experienced this problem, we're on fire, we've lost an engine or whatever, and they're basically going to follow you till they lose radar contact, which is going to be pretty close to the ground. And if you are in a dire emergency situation, help is going to be on the way fairly quickly, and they're going to be able to pinpoint your location fairly accurately. Back in the old days, we still cover it on check rides. We are required to ask about filing flight plans, how to file a flight plan, VFR flight plan, that is. And how you open and close a flight plan, and we talk about that. But the fact of the matter is, most people nowadays do not file VFR flight plans. And let's just take an example of a flight from, say, here up to Little Rock, Arkansas. Offhand, I don't even know how far it is, but I'm going to say it's 250 miles. Let's say it's a 2.5-hour flight in a 100-knot airplane. If I were to file a VFR flight plan, I could take off from this airport, and I could activate my flight plan. And let's say 30 minutes out, I had an emergency, and I landed in a field and crashed. Well, I'm still not even due into Little Rock for another 2 hours. So before anybody even knows that I'm late, it's going to be another 2 hours as I sit in that field. Probably, and quite honestly, I do not know what the process is with the FAA for looking for overdue airplanes, but they probably give it a grace period, and then they're probably going to call the Little Rock Airport and say, hey, did this airplane land at your airport? And they're going to say no, and then they're probably going to call the departing airport and say, hey, did this airplane depart? So it could be several hours down the road before they even realize that you're missing and start looking for you at that point. And then on top of that, they don't know where you went down. They know you went down between Houston and Little Rock, Arkansas, 250 miles. So
that's a big patch.
That's a big patch, and lots of woods, lots of water, lots of places that you probably don't want to be. So VFR flight following is a great thing. The other thing it does is it basically gets you used to dealing with the air traffic control system, because they're going to hand you off from sector to sector. Leaving here, you're going to talk to Houston Approach, and then they're probably going to hand you off to Houston Center, and then they're probably going to hand you off to, I'm guessing, Fort Worth Center, and then Fort Worth Center is probably going to hand you off to Little Rock Approach, to Little Rock Tower, and so forth. So a couple of things. First of all, you don't have to know any of the frequencies because they're going to give it to you. And but the other thing is if you plan to work towards an instrument rating, you're getting used to working in the system. The difference is you're going to be at altitudes plus 500 feet, and when you're flying IFR, you're just going to be at 4,000, 5,000, 6,000. Really not a whole lot of difference than operating in an IFR situation.
Yeah, as a student at this school a few years ago, we did a lot of flight followings when I was working on my private cross-country stuff and my instrument rating, as we would take our long cross-countries and shoot approaches at different airports. And I think the radios, while they're difficult for a lot of people, and we had a good show a few weeks ago on radio communications, go back and listen to that if you struggle with radios. The radios have not been a problem for me necessarily, but I think flying with radios became a problem early on when I was new to flying. And we have a really good quote-unquote mission here where you can fly to Galveston through the I-10 corridor, which means you're really flying right through downtown Houston, and you do get handed off at least once as you make that trek. So it's really good for a young pilot to experience leaving a towered airport, getting handed off to approach, changing to probably either center or the east side of town, and then being transitioned to Galveston's tower as well. So you're going to get a few switches, not too quick. They're not too back to back, but they're probably all 10, 12 minutes apart, and gives you a lot of opportunity. And a lot's going on there during that flight following. As you said, I think as I became an instrument rated pilot, I was shocked how similar a flight following was to an IFR. Not necessarily a flight plan, but the experience for the pilot flying the aircraft.
Right.
Obviously, you can't be in the clouds and you can't do IFR rules type things, but the communication and the system is very, very similar.
Yeah.
And while in that aircraft, I've been given a lot of advisories, which are very appreciative. That I-10 corridor is pretty narrow, so there's normally planes flying both directions through that corridor. There's normally helicopters. The Houston Police Department's out there flying around in a helicopter. I've had to be diverted around a blimp that was at the soccer game one time downtown. There's some active TFRs down there occasionally because of the baseball games or the soccer games going on. So lots of good experiences that you get to participate in with flight following. And the radios is something that you'll get stronger with as well if you're doing it. And they might terminate or radar services sooner than maybe on an IFR flight plan, but there's really no downside to requesting a flight following. When we kick this show off, you mentioned that really anybody can get it. There's no special requirement to request a flight following, but there are a few ways you can request a flight following. So we do it very often on the ground. First call to Hooks Ground is Hooks Ground, Skyline 149er uniform. I'm at United. I have Sierra. I'm ready to taxi. I want to fly following to Austin Executive Airport. And I want to fly over there at a certain altitude. I normally give them that altitude that I want to fly at. They read back a squawk code, give me my departure frequency. It's very similar to a IFR readback, and they validate that the readback's correct just like you would if it was a flight plan. So on the ground is one way. Some airports don't have a tower or ground frequencies, but you can always request them in the air as well. And normally the fastest way to do that is to find out what the radio channel is for that airport, to find Austin Approach or, like you said, Fort Worth Center or whatever's probably listed there on the chart. Just call them up, tail number, and I have a request, and they'll ask you what your request is, and you give them where you are basically at, 10 miles southeast of Austin Executive Airport, would like a flight following back to David Wayne Hooks. They'll give you a squawk code very similar to a pop-up IFR flight following request or flight plan request. But very, very valuable tool that you shouldn't be intimidated by. I say this often, ATC personnel, air traffic control personnel are service-oriented. They want to help us.
Yeah.
They want us to be safe, and they want us to get to where we're going. So while you might hear of the one or two bad ATC people out there who are probably just having a bad day and are a little grumpy, for the most part, everybody I've ever worked with or talked to has been a very helpful person for me in the flight systems, for sure.
The other thing that you can do is, if you are working toward an instrument rating, you can ask them for an instrument approach under VFR conditions. Obviously, you can't file IFR, but you can, if you're going into, I'll just go use Little Rock. If we're going into Little Rock, you could call up Little Rock Approach and ask them for, if you figure out what runway they're using. I don't even know what runways they have up there, but figure out what runway they're using and what approach would be appropriate. You could ask them for a vector to an RNAV approach or an ILS approach or VOR, whatever they happen to have up there. And really, this smells and tastes exactly like an IFR flight plan, really. He may say something to the effect of maintain VFR, which you're going to do anyway. But it's just good practice.
We were talking about this recently. It was a completely different topic, but it is applicable here now. Should you shoot an approach when it's VFR? And I think that we both agree that it's a great best practice as a pilot. If I'm coming into this airport, there's either one end of the runway has an RNAV approach, one end has a localizer approach. As a pilot with 400 hours, I'm always tuned to one of those when I'm coming back here, for no other reason than to keep my situational awareness extremely sharp, but also kind of practicing with the tools that I would use if there was a little bit of cloud cover or a little bit of less than VMC, we'll call it, right?
Right.
This is a great opportunity for pilots all alone, foggles off, people fly looking out the windows, but to go ahead and fly the approach with the right people helping you on the radios. Just let them know you're doing it as a practice, and they'll be happy to help you as well.
Another thing that I encourage new instrument pilots to do is to fly approaches in VFR conditions, VMC conditions, I should say, and just give yourself a visual picture of what one dot off the localizer might look like at 5 miles out, what a dot low on the glide slope might look like at 5 miles out. I think, one of the things that I see a lot, in my opinion, is overcorrecting. And so if you're 5 miles out and you're a dot off the localizer, you're not really that far off.
I was going to say, it probably looks like most approaches.
Yeah, exactly. You're not that far off, but what I see maybe younger pilots doing is way overcorrecting, making a huge course correction, or a heading correction, I should say, to grab that localizer, which is only a dot off, where really it's just maybe a little tap on the rudder, just a little bit of a turn, not much turn at all. So by doing these in visual conditions, I think it helps you memorize what it looks like.
Yeah, it definitely does build confidence for sure, because that deflection's nothing in the grand scheme of things.
Right.
We talked about some of the other values as if we were having an emergency. Obviously, they would know better where we're at. I think one of the other values is they're constantly watching you. We know that, but they're also constantly diverting you. And diverting sounds like they're turning me away from something, but they're helping me get to the place that I'm trying to go. And not every plane has fancy equipment. So most of us are used to following a magenta line on a GPS or ForeFlight or something like that. But if you don't have those tools, the winds could be blowing you off course. And what I learned much later, after I flew nicer aircraft and went back to older aircraft, was without those magenta lines, you're flying a heading that doesn't necessarily correlate to where you're trying to go, right, depending on the winds. And what I was taught, well, real early on, was they're correcting for wind for you. So they have an idea of what the wind is. They have an idea of what your track is, and they'll tell you to turn 10 degrees to the right to a heading of 270 maybe to stay on course, or to get to your destination, or for direct. Or they might say that for traffic, but they're taking into consideration that is with the wind correction. And if you're not heading in the right direction, they're going to keep turning you, turning you. And what happens, I've seen when I've been safety pilot for people, and they're assuming that that's track. That's not track, that's heading. So whatever your DG says is what you should be flying on, based on what they're telling you. If you keep trying to correct to track, they're going to keep turning you, and you're just going to keep flying the same track. So it confuses the system. Right. But they are helping all along the way, and they'll turn you around other aircraft and other things as well. In Houston, way down south, there's a set of towers. We all call them the Missouri City Towers. I think they're 2,700 feet in the air.
Yeah.
It's almost half a mile. They're way up there.
Right.
And there's some airspace shelves that you're worrying about as well. And so they really make sure people are aware of those towers. They're familiar with the area, and that they're diverting them around those towers. So very helpful. Another value to a flight following for sure.
Yeah. And another thing is, if you really did get into an emergency situation, it's, again, a lot of us on the equipment we have in the airplane, we have a nearest button, and we can push a button, and it will tell us where the nearest airport is, and which, again, may be behind us, which we talked about this on a previous episode. But if you have a problem and you say, Center, Cessna 123, we've got a fire on board, where's the nearest airport? And with a touch of a key, they'll be able to tell you such and such an airport is 11 o'clock, 7 miles, and they'll probably even tell you it's got a 47-foot long runway, and they can probably help you with
they'll definitely give you a heading right away.
Yeah. And they'll work with you. They will definitely work with you. Their air traffic controllers are adrenaline junkies, just a little bit like pilots are. So you tell them something like that, and they get pretty excited.
So all so far flight following. Let's talk a little bit about best practices related to just cross-country flying, which was one of the requests from the listener as well. Obviously, the first one is, if you're going to fly cross-country, request a flight following. That's a no-brainer. Other things that I think I've gotten better at, and I'm sure there's a million ideas out there of cross-country tips and tricks, but I think I understand weather so much more today than I ever did, even as a private pilot, maybe even as an early instrument-rated pilot, and how bad it can change from one side of a road to the other, as we were joking about earlier. You know, at some point there's always good weather just on the other side of bad weather. I've made, unfortunately, trips where I didn't do the quite the right amount of weather planning where it looks beautiful here, and got up in the air and flew 30 miles and kind of ran into a virtual brick wall of clouds that I wasn't able to go through or get through to do whatever I was doing on that given day. So weather, I think, is key. There's tons of tools out there, and as a flight school owner, I think about winds and solo student pilots almost 24 hours a day. And so I'm also thinking, when I'm thinking weather, I'm thinking winds. So what are the winds going to be at the destination where my students are going to solo? Is it beyond our own company minimums? Is it beyond their own personal minimums? Should they be flying in that type? And what's it going to be when they get back here? Often, this is southern Texas, flat and hot most of the time. The winds normally pick up throughout the day. Someone leaving at 10 a.m. when it's kind of calm, 2 p.m., that could be a rough crosswind when they get back.
Right.
And there's ways to check and look at that forecast. So I'd say weather planning all up, but it's not just clouds. It's also winds, precipitation, dew point spread. I think that's one that not many pilots know about, right? But if the dew point spread is forecasted to come closer and closer and closer, the air is going to become saturated, and then we're going to have some level of fog or some level of moisture in the air that's visible. That's probably going to be bad for a private or a student pilot.
All right.
What else? Would you say from a point of cross country best practices? We talked a little bit about checkpoints.
Yeah, I would say picking of checkpoints. I've seen so many people that will pick a checkpoint on a cross country because on a check ride we're gonna fly the first few checkpoints of your cross country, and we have a lot of around here on the sectional, a lot of it's the way it's depicted on the sectional. It says pumping station, and I'll ask him in the briefing room. I said, "Well, what does a pumping station look like?" And I sometimes I'll get, "Well, I don't know, but my CFI said I'd be able to see it." And say, "Well, if you don't know what it looks like, how are you going to know?" So that, unless you're familiar with it, that may not be a great thing. One of the things to me that don't make good checkpoints are, first of all, smaller, very much smaller bodies of water, little ponds that may be depicted on a sectional, because if it's in the middle of summer and we're having a drought, that pond may not be there. Mm-hmm. If we've had a lot of rain and things have flooded, that pond may look like a lake. So be careful.
Or like 10 ponds.
Yeah. So be careful about that. Now, sure, the big lakes that we have around here should be there. Another thing that I believe doesn't make a very good checkpoint is private airports. They look real good on the sectional because there's a big circle with an R around it, and they usually even have a name to it. And you're thinking, okay, this is Fred's Airport, but Fred's Airport is just some mowed grass in his backyard, and
no lines, no lights.
Right,
doesn't look like a runway at all.
Right. May be difficult to see. Unless you're familiar with it. If you are familiar with that particular airport and you know what to look for, that's a different thing. Another thing that I see that applicants will use for checkpoints are long things. In other words, power lines and long roads, railroad tracks. From a time standpoint, they make an okay checkpoint, but from a accuracy standpoint, they don't make a very good checkpoint, because if I'm flying eastbound and I'm looking for a major highway, I could be 20, 30, up to 80, theoretically 80 degrees off my heading, and I will eventually hit that road. But intersections work better than just roads itself, or railroad tracks, or power lines, or so look for a bend. Look for something very distinct that you can find if you're going to use something like that. Rivers, a bend in a river usually works pretty good, but again, be careful with rivers because sometimes they dry up and they don't look exactly like what you think they might look like on the sectional.
What about a town? What would you say a town's a good one?
Yeah, if it's big enough, I would say a town is very good. Just be careful. A lot of times towns are close together, and you might think that you're at town A, but you're really at town B.
Good point.
So be careful about that. And I mean, there's the old story about flying down low and looking at the name of the town on the water tower, and sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. But
please, if you go to this flight school, don't do that.
Yeah. Of course, I mean, sometimes the water tower just say, "Go Lions,"
Yeah.
and unless you happen to know the mascot of the local high school, it may not do you any good.
I think the other best practice for cross country that I don't hear enough about is having a really good backup plan. We often, as student pilots, we're so anxious. We want to go. We're trying to find every reason to go to complete this cross country so I can get closer to check ride. And we know the day's calm. We know the airplane's available. We want to go. And we don't think about coming back. What do I do if I hear a little something that's a little odd? What if the plane's not performing the way I want to perform? We talked a little bit about being on one magneto. How would I address that? I think having a backup plan and a no-go strategy is so much more valuable to the big picture of your aviation career than just checking that one milestone off the list. We say it often, but it's so true, and you'll believe me when you get to 400 plus hours. It's so much better to be down here wishing I was up there than being up there wishing I was down here. It's a lot easier to make that no-go decision than to make that how do I get on the ground decision, for sure.
Yeah.
So always have a backup plan. I would create multiple backup plans. What would keep me from going from my first stop to the next stop? Is it a fuel thing? Is it an alternator thing? Is it I'm always now trying to find a reason not to go. And while that might sound counterintuitive, I think that makes me a much better, safer pilot than the one person out there that might be always finding the reason why they can get off the ground and go. I just don't think that's the right mindset, for sure.
Right.
Any other cross-country best practices or tips, Wally, that you would share?
One thing I would say, a lot of the applicants that I work with like to plan their cross countries at actually fairly low altitudes.
Good point.
And going up higher is not a bad thing. Obviously, we've got oxygen requirements if we get up too high. But, a 2.5 hour cross country flight down at 3,500 feet, if you could go up to 7,500 feet, 9,500 feet, and that might be something to consider. I know a lot of the dual cross countries that get done around here. I mean, we don't get very high. We're in an airplane that's limited on performance, and a lot of times it's hot. The airplane doesn't really climb, so we stay down low. And but why not get up to 9,500 feet for a couple of things? First of all, your glide range is a lot more. If you lose an engine at 9,500 feet, you probably have 15 to 20 minutes before you land with an engine out. You got plenty of time. It's cooler up there, and if you have a tailwind, you probably have more of a tailwind up there. So and you can see farther. You can just see farther. I mean, up at a higher altitude, obviously. So don't be afraid to get up there to a higher altitude.
Yeah, I remember when I took my private check ride. The guy said something. I was ignorant. I asked him if he flew GA, and I think he said high and fast. And I was like, "Oh, that's so cool! You can fly high and fast." I'm not a high and fast guy, but in essence, I was. I think I was so much taught to fly at 2,500 feet that I never really thought that flying high was good. But now if I fly to Austin, I'm at 8,500 feet all the time. One, for the temperature. I love being in the cooler air, but I think I understand the value of altitude so much better now than I did before, all about glide ratio and getting somewhere and being able to find a better place to land.
Right.
So great tip, obviously. Well, with that, we will wrap up today's podcast. Thanks for listening. Please share the show with your friends and other aviators out there. As always, fly safe and stay behind the prop.
Thanks for checking out the Behind the Prop podcast. Be sure to click subscribe and check us out online at BehindTheProp.com. Behind the Prop is recorded in Houston, Texas. Creator and host is Bobby Doss. Co-host is Wally Mulhern. The show is for entertainment purposes only and is not meant to replace actual flight instruction. Thanks for listening, and remember, fly safe.